Have you ever wondered how to grow in a large pot starting from a seed or a clone? Well, in this video, we're going to get into it. You're here with Mark on Perfect Gardens TV. So real fast, let's talk about some of the issues that I see more often than not when growing with a seed or a clone starting off the large pot. Some of the first things I notice is people end up overwatering. And how do they do that? Well, they water their entire pot versus just watering where the roots are at. And what happens? Well, if you're using dry amendments or liquid fertilizer, you're going to end up having an excess of salt builds up. If you're using liquid fertilizer in the areas where the roots are not there yet, or they're not in that area of the pot yet. The next thing is, so what ends up happening is all that water ends up becoming stagnated. And before you know it, I normally end up seeing some type of a root-bound issue start to arise, or what I end up seeing is excess salts build up in the area where there was no roots. And before you know it, the roots end up growing into potentially an excess phosphorus or potassium area in the pot, because first are growing into areas where the water, like I said, is necrotic or stagnated, which becomes stale and dead. And bad bacteria begin to form in those areas of the soil. And then second is you might run into dry bags. Because the salts were never taken up in the first place, they're left behind, and then you have excess salts being built up in the area where the roots had not grown in yet. So over the last 7 or 8 years, I've developed a technique and really just took the technique from the tomato industry, something my father showed me when I was 7 or 8 years old, and I started to apply it pretty frequently to all my VIP clients. And I've explained this now 500 or 600 times, and I thought, hey, it's about time I create a video explaining how to start off in a large size pot and get tons of extra growth, excess yield, and you're able to gain an extra foot or so in the growing space. So normally I actually like to start off using a large pot, a minimum for indoor growing. If you're using soil, if you're using cocoa, if you're using other things, you can get away with using a smaller pot. If you're using synthetic fertilizer, you can get away with using a smaller pot. Why is that? It's because you're providing liquid nutrients that is readily available to the plant, and you don't need the microbes to break down the dry amendments for you. You can still use microbes using synthetic fertilizer, but I don't want to get too much into that. It's just about making sure you're not using excess salts that make the bacteria dormant. In that situation, you can get away with that, but what ends up happening is, more often than not, is inconsistent watering practices. Salts begin to build up on the bottom of the pot or around the cloth fabric if you're using cloth fabric, and before you know it, excess phosphorus and potassium issues begin to arise, which I actually talk about these things in my recent calcium video. So I recommend you checking that out, so it gives you some indicators of what to look for in this situation. So if you're using dry amendments, though, or using living soil at some level, bare minimum is you want to be using pretty much a 10-gallon size pot. But same situation can happen. If you fill up that pot, drop the seed in, or fill up the pot and put the clone in, a lot of people end up watering the entire pot. And before you know it, all those other issues start to arise that I mentioned in the beginning of the video. And so what I've recommended over the years is to actually, I'm including pictures to just show this. What ends up happening is you're going to want to fill up the bottom of your pot. So let's say you're using a 10-gallon size pot, and it's about a foot tall. You're going to want to fill up the bottom 3 inches with soil, right? And then if you wanted to get a little clever, you can get like a milk jug, cut off the bottom, cut off the top, use it like an insert you would use for baking, where you would use them for making cookies, like a house, or you'd use them for the kids. You would stamp the dough and it would make a little house or a star or a circle. In the same situation, you would get a little like a milk tray, cut off the bottom, cut off the top, and just insert it in right where you put the seed or the clone. What does this do? Well, this creates a barrier, so when you water, you're never going to water outside of that area. You don't want to add in water to the soil that's on the outside of your pots or where the plants are growing, because the microbes will begin to break down the dry amendments that are in that soil. Because more often than not, what I recommend my clients to do is actually to pre-mix your soil. Sometimes people call it super soils. Right, so they'll be putting dry amendments in there, and the second you add water and bacteria, they begin to break things down. But if there's no roots to take up that nutrients, before or not, that you're going to end up having excess nitrates build up, as well as phosphorus and potassium are very water soluble. Actually, there were some of the things that bacteria will break down most easily to make it readily available for the plant. And these excess phosphorus and potassium could build up, and they're also the first salts that will form back into a crystal, right? And when it forms back into a crystal, it begins to build dry pockets, and it begins to create, it's like the same thing that you see when you drink some water and it falls on your shirt and it rolls off your shirt, but then the second drink surface tension. It's that the salts begin to build surface tension in the soil. So when you put that insert in and you water around that area, you're making sure to keep that small area where the seed or the clone is with water, and it's not breaking that area. At that point, as the seed pops or as the clone begins to grow, you would just remove that insert. It's because what ends up happening is the roots in the very beginning, the roots are not going to go much further than the leaf. So let's say the stem comes up and the leaf comes this way right here and stops right here. Well, if you go straight down, your roots are stopped within this area. They're right here, right? So the farthest leaf tip comes out right here. Well, the general vicinity of your roots are right here. And so everything beyond that area, there's no roots in there. So if you put water and bacteria in there, things will begin to break down. Excess nitrates and salts will begin to build up. And as the roots grow into this area, it could work out for you, or it could cause issues just because of where those salts are at and dependent upon the size and health of the plant. So what we're talking about is really just getting this started. And because you're at the bottom 3 inches of soil, as that clone or plant begins to grow up, you're going to make sure to keep the main stem, right? But you're going to begin to take off the inner nodes. And you're going to want to leave a few inner nodes on, obviously, because that's going to allow the plant to keep growing. And every time you take off a few inner nodes, you're going to add more soil back into the pot. So you might be covering up, instead of it being 3 inches, it might be 4 inches or 5 inches. And then as the plant grows more, you'll take off more inner nodes, just showing the stem, and you add in more soil. And then you repeat this process again and again and again until it gets to the very top of the pot. And then when you see anyone that looks at your plant at the top of the pot, they would never realize that there's over 8 or 9 inches of stem buried. And like a clone, where we pull a clone from the plant, wherever you see those little fibrous hairs coming off the stem is another root. Yes, of course we're giving up the root. If we're going with seed, we're giving up I forgot what the main root is, the taproot. But what we're doing is we're putting out a lot more lateral roots, all the way up from the bottom, all the way up. And if you can imagine, that's going to make your nutrient uptake tenfold. This is one of these little secrets I've been holding back from releasing to the industry until now, right? But you're going to end up having so much lateral roots, and you're going to end up gaining about 10 inches of height, where your plant can grow a little higher up if you wanted to. But when that plant is right above the surface of that soil, you're now dealing with potentially a 2.5, 3 week old plant, versus if you would put the seed or the clone right on top of that, it just made a hole and put it right in, you're going to be losing height, and the plant isn't going to be having this crazy, insane development of roots. Yeah, so through this process, every time you transplant, or when you transplant in, you're going to want to use a product called mycos. Mycos is super important. You always want to have at least one relationship with the endo-fungi that actually creates a host with the soil. And every time you add more soil, you're going to put a little more mycos around that stem, and keep doing that all the way up. From there, basically, you're going to want to, as the plant begins to grow up, that's when really you'll be watering with BAM and drops of balance. BAM stands for badass microbes. If you haven't checked out our video of the difference between EM1 and BAM, I highly recommend to do so as well. And you guys already know what drops of balance is. It's an ionic sulfated mineral product that cleans water and adds up to 100 trace minerals to your water. Sulfate minerals, which is sulfates and bacteria love each other. So I hope this video was kind of helpful to understand how to control the amount of water you're giving your seed or clone initially, how to gain an extra, potentially 8 to 10 inches of growth, how to explode your root system and build a stronger plant. And with this much stem buried, your plant's going to be stronger, and it's going to be able to hold up more yield overall because it's anchored further into the soil. And remember, the smallest pot you want to go with when using living soil is going to be a 10-gallon size pot. Ideally, a lot of growers use 20 or 30-gallon size pots for indoor growing. And I'm speaking mainly to the growers that are using 10-gallon size pots, that are using pots for indoor growing. Then when they harvest, they dump their soil, re-amend it, and go again. If you're using 30-gallon size pots, or if you're using larger pots, this same technique actually can work really well, especially if you're starting in greenhouses or even going indoor. The issue, though, is a lot of growers aren't going to want to dump a 30-gallon size pot every transplant. But if they did, this would be the best technique to gain an extra, 15, 17 inches of growth early in the beginning, because you're putting that plant as far down into that soil as possible. This little technique helps out a lot for excess watering early in the beginning, excess nitrates, excess fertilizer buildup. It helps out a lot on over-fertilizing in the beginning if you're using liquid nutrients, and you're really able to max out your yield. Again, just like if you're growing from seed, normally you're going to have a pre-flowering cycle if you're not using autos. But even with autos, when you transplant autos, it puts them to shock, so they go into flowering immediately. If you want to veg longer and have a stronger plant, this technique works phenomenal for auto plants, because you keep expanding their environment with their soil system. And as you keep adding more soil, they just keep growing stronger and stronger and stronger before they get all the way up to the top area. And I see this happen a lot also for outdoor growing for autos. They get up to, 3 feet tall, beautiful, bushy plants. And for indoor plants, they're always stunted and smaller. And I, over the years, recognize it's mainly just because of the stress we put them through. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful on understanding how to take advantage of all these other things you can when transplanting or using seeds or transplants and using large pots. Thank you so much, and have a great grow.